They laughed when I tripped at the mating ceremony, until the Alpha King took my hand in silence. Candles lined every archway, flickering in time with the hushed whispers of nobles gathered for the mating ceremony. This ceremony, held once every decade, was a spectacle of light and shadow, a celebration of bonds meant to unite the strongest families of the supernatural world. And for the first time in her life, Lyria, a simple human scholar with no title or heritage, had been invited. She felt the weight of every gaze as she stepped through the massive oak doors. Her heart raced, a mixture of fear and excitement, as silk and velvet brushed against her arms. Every step she took felt louder than it was, echoing through the marble hall, making her pulse thrum like a drum. She had prepared for this moment for months, memorizing the names and faces of the court, yet now, standing among them, she felt entirely out of place. Whispers followed her like shadows. "Who is that girl?" a noblewoman murmured behind a fan of jade. "A human here." Lyria kept her head high, telling herself that this was a world of magic, but her own power was unknown even to herself. She had learned over time that her mark, an intricate crescent-shaped symbol etched faintly into her wrist, was a curiosity no one could explain. It had glowed once in her childhood when she had cried under the moon, and again just days ago when she had touched the crystal doors of the palace. The ceremony had begun. Fey lords and ladies circled the hall, their movements precise, almost like a dance. Music deep and haunting filled the air, a melody older than the mountains themselves. Lyria stepped forward as instructed, careful to follow the rhythm of the ritual. And then it happened. Her foot caught on the hem of her dress, and she stumbled forward, sprawling onto the marble floor. Gasps echoed through the hall. Laughter followed, sharp and cruel, slicing through the music and whispers alike. Lyria's face burned as crimson spread from her ears to her cheeks. She had imagined herself standing tall, graceful, a figure of poise. Instead, she lay humiliated before the entire court. "Pathetic," a young nobleman jeered, his eyes alight with amusement. Lyria tried to rise, but the polished floor betrayed her. The laughter grew louder. She wanted nothing more than to disappear into the shadows, to escape the cruelty of eyes that judged her every misstep. And then, in the midst of the mockery, a shadow fell over her. Kalen, the Alpha King, stood before her. He was tall, impossibly tall, with a presence that seemed to bend the light. His eyes, a pale silver, watched her without a flicker of amusement. He said nothing. He did not laugh, nor did he speak a single word. He simply extended a hand. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The laughter died in the hall. The whispers vanished. All that remained was the quiet sound of her own ragged breathing and the steady, commanding presence of Kalen. Hesitantly, Lyria placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, steady, yet not harsh. She felt a strange warmth spread through her palm, an energy that pulsed like the beat of a hidden drum. The court's eyes were on them, yet Kalen's gaze never left hers. It was as if he could see everything she had ever feared, everything she had ever dreamed of, and still chose to stand with her. Lyria felt an unfamiliar courage swell in her chest. Without a word, Kalen helped her to her feet. She stumbled slightly as she rose, and he did not tighten his hold or release her. He simply waited, letting her find her balance. Around them the hall had grown still, the air thick with tension. No one dared to speak. "You," Kalen began, his voice low, carrying a weight that made her tremble. But before he could finish, the music resumed, pulling the court back into motion. He released her hand and stepped back, allowing her to join the circle once more. Though she was now upright, Lyria felt as though she were walking in a dream. Her heart thudded not with fear, but with a strange, unfamiliar longing. She did not understand what had passed between them, this silent connection, this recognition, but she knew, somehow, that nothing would ever be the same. The rest of the ceremony unfolded in a blur. Lyria moved with careful precision, trying to erase the memory of her fall from the minds of those around her. She watched Kalen from the corner of her eye, noting how he remained an observer, detached yet attentive. It was unsettling and comforting at the same time. As the ceremony concluded, nobles approached Kalen with smiles and bows, discussing alliances, proposals, and marriages. Lyria remained on the edge of the gathering, unsure whether she was invited to speak or to simply vanish once again into obscurity. Then Kalen did something unexpected. He returned to her side, silent as a shadow, and whispered her name. Lyria. She looked up, startled. His voice was softer than she had imagined, but it carried the same authority that had silenced the hall moments before. "You will walk with me," he said, turning toward the balcony overlooking the cliffs. She wanted to refuse, to step back into her safe, small world, but something in his eyes made her hesitate. Together they walked. The doors of the palace opened onto the cold night air, and the wind swept her hair across her face. Below, the ocean crashed against jagged rocks, a symphony of power and danger. Lyria felt alive, more alive than she had ever felt before. Kalen did not speak for some time. He simply stood beside her, watching the horizon, and somehow that was enough. "I am not one of your kind," Lyria finally said, her voice trembling slightly. Kalen's eyes shifted toward her, silver light reflecting the moon. "And yet," he said, "you are here." She blinked, unsure what he meant. His gaze was both piercing and gentle, a contradiction she could not reconcile. "There are forces at play," he continued, still silent to the rest of the world, "that do not care for rank or birth or fear. You have caught my attention for reasons even I do not fully understand." Lyria's breath caught. She had imagined attention from kings, from nobles, but never like this, not with such quiet, undeniable intensity. The wind tugged at her sleeves, and Kalen reached out again, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His hand lingered near her cheek, and the warmth from their earlier touch pulsed faintly in her chest. She looked down, unsure how to respond. "You have power," he said softly, "and yet you fear it. Fear can be a chain or it can be a key. Choose wisely." Before she could reply, a horn sounded in the distance, a signal for the end of the ceremony. Kalen released her hand, bowing his head ever so slightly in acknowledgement of the tradition. "Return to the hall," he instructed. "The court has not forgotten your fall, but neither have I forgotten your courage." Lyria watched him retreat into the shadows of the palace, her pulse still racing. She felt both elated and terrified. She had been humiliated, yet touched in a way she did not fully understand. She had stumbled in front of the court, yet had caught the attention of the most powerful being she had ever known. That night in her chamber, Lyria could not sleep. Her thoughts returned to the strange warmth that had passed between her and Kalen, to the quiet authority of his gaze, and to the unspoken promise that lingered in the air. Somewhere deep within, she sensed that her life had changed forever. The world she had known, small and safe, had shattered like glass beneath the weight of the palace gates. And outside, beyond the walls, forces she could not yet name were stirring, forces that had been waiting for someone like her. She traced her wrist, where the crescent mark lay hidden beneath her sleeve, and felt a faint pulse, almost like a heartbeat of its own. She did not understand it, and yet she felt certain that it had something to do with Kalen, with the Alpha King, and with the strange, silent bond that had formed between them. And somewhere in the shadows of the palace, Kalen looked down at the hall, his mind tangled with questions and memories long buried. Something about Lyria's presence unsettled him, not with fear, but with curiosity and longing. He did not know whether it was destiny, chance, or something older and more dangerous than either, but he knew one thing. The human girl who had tripped in the mating ceremony had awakened something in him, a force he could neither control nor ignore. The moon rose high over the cliffs, casting silver light across the palace. Inside, the hall was quiet now, yet the echoes of laughter and whispers still lingered, as if the walls themselves remembered. And in the stillness, Lyria and Kalen, separated by tradition, custom, and worlds, felt the first threads of a story neither had chosen, but both would follow. A story of power, of longing, and of a bond that could not be undone. The morning after the mating ceremony, the palace was quiet, but the echoes of Lyria's stumble still lingered in every corridor. She had returned to her chambers before dawn, unwilling to face the court until she could compose herself. The room, usually her sanctuary, felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were judging her. She traced her wrist, feeling the crescent mark there, a faint warmth lingering from her contact with Kaelin. Outside her window, the cliffs stretched into the distance, their jagged edges cutting against the pale light of morning. The sea roared below, relentless and constant, a reminder that the world beyond the palace was just as powerful and unforgiving as the court within. Lyria took a deep breath and tried to calm her racing heart. She could not stop thinking about Kaelin, the way he had looked at her, the quiet strength in his gaze, and the strange warmth that had passed between them. Yet she knew the danger of such thoughts. He was the Alpha King, a being centuries older than herself, with power she could barely comprehend. And she was just a human, a low-born scholar who had stumbled at the wrong moment in front of the wrong audience. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A soft knock on the door startled her. "Enter," she called, trying to steady her voice. The door opened, and a young attendant stepped inside, holding a folded robe of deep violet silk, embroidered with silver threads. "Mistress Lyria," the girl said politely, "the Alpha King requests your presence in the library." Lyria's stomach twisted. "The king?" "Yes, mistress, he will be waiting." Lyria swallowed hard. She had expected whispers, maybe even a formal reprimand, but this invitation was something else entirely. Something dangerous, something compelling. The library was vast, a cathedral of knowledge. Ancient tomes lined the walls, their spines glowing faintly under the light of enchanted lanterns. The air smelled of old paper, ink, and magic, a heady mixture that made Lyria's heart beat faster. She stepped carefully, trying not to show her nervousness, but every creak of the floorboards seemed loud in the silence. Kaelin was already there, standing beside a tall window that looked out over the cliffs. He did not turn as she entered. "Kaelin," she said softly, unsure how to address him. He finally turned, his silver eyes catching hers, holding them for a long moment. "Lyria," he said simply, as if her name itself carried weight. "You called me here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes," he said, stepping closer. "I need to understand the mark you carry. It is not human. It is not merely a curiosity. It is something older, something powerful." Lyria looked down at her wrist, where the crescent mark lay hidden beneath the sleeve of her dress. She had never understood it, had always thought it was a harmless birthmark, but Kaelin's words made her heart pound. Something in her chest whispered that this mark was not just a part of her, it was a part of something much larger, something connected to the world of Fae in ways she could not yet comprehend. I don't know what it means," she admitted. "Perhaps you do not," Kaelin said, his voice calm but firm, "but the mark responds to energy, to emotion, to life itself. And it called to me during the ceremony. I felt it." Lyria swallowed. She had felt it too, the strange warmth when their hands touched. But she had dismissed it as a momentary connection, a coincidence. Now, with Kaelin speaking of it, she wondered if it had been something far more significant. He gestured toward a large, carved table at the center of the room. "Sit," he instructed. "We will begin." For the next hour, Kaelin guided her through the library, showing her books older than the kingdom itself, scrolls that described magical marks, ancient curses, and prophecies written in languages long forgotten. Lyria listened, absorbing every word, every symbol, every illustration, though much of it was difficult to understand. She had always been a quick learner, but the world of the Fae was like nothing she had ever studied. Yet Kaelin was patient. When she faltered, he would gently correct her, never condescending but always aware of the boundaries between them. And every time their hands brushed, even accidentally over a page, she felt the same warmth as before. A thrill that made her pulse race, though she did not know what to call it. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows through the tall windows. The library grew colder as the evening approached, and the wind whispered against the glass. Lyria shivered slightly, and Kalen noticed. "You are tired," he said quietly. "You should rest." I can't leave," she admitted. "There is too much to understand." "Then I will stay," he said simply. "I will help you." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Lyria wanted to ask him why he cared, why he had chosen to pay attention to her of all people, but the words caught in her throat. She could only nod, grateful and terrified at the same time. Night fell, and the library was illuminated by the soft glow of enchanted lanterns. Kalen spoke of Fey history, of the delicate balance of power in his kingdom, and of the threats that lurked beyond the borders of the cliffs. Lyria listened, absorbing every detail, realizing how small her world had once been. She had thought herself powerful in her knowledge, but she now understood how limited that knowledge truly was. And yet, even as she felt small, she also felt a strange courage. Kalen's presence, calm and unwavering, made her feel as if she could face anything. As the night deepened, Kalen moved closer, not threatening but simply present, a silent guardian. Lyria's heart raced. She could not deny the pull she felt toward him, the unspoken connection that had begun the night of the ceremony. But she also knew the danger. To be close to the Alpha King was to invite attention from allies, from enemies, and from the very forces that had shaped this world. "You have a gift," Kalen said quietly, breaking the silence. "And with that gift comes responsibility. The mark you carry is more than a symbol. It is a key, and the choice of how to use it is yours." I don't know if I'm ready," Lyria whispered. "Few are," he replied, "but readiness is not the point. Action is. Courage, even when fear is present, is what shapes destiny." She looked at him, startled by the weight of his words. They were simple, but they carried the gravity of centuries, the weight of a crown, and the burden of a kingdom. Yet they also carried something else, a quiet hope, a belief that she could rise above her fears. A sudden noise echoed through the library, a soft creak, barely audible, yet enough to make both of them turn. The shadow of a figure moved near the far shelves. "Who's there?" Kalen called, his voice low and commanding. The figure stepped forward into the light, revealing a young Fey noble with a sly smile. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said, "but it seems the human has caught the king's attention." Lyria stiffened, feeling the old fear return. The court would not accept her, not truly. She was an outsider, a mistake in the eyes of those born to power. Kalen's gaze sharpened. "Leave," he commanded. The noble bowed slightly, still smiling, but retreated without another word. Lyria exhaled, her body trembling. Why are they against me?" she asked. "They fear what they do not understand," Kalen said. "And you are unlike anything they have ever seen. That fear will not vanish, but you will learn to stand, Lyria. You will learn to wield your power and to command your place in this world." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not only of fear. There was also relief and a flicker of pride. For the first time she felt that she was not entirely alone. Kalen reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, not in dominance but in reassurance. "Rest now," he said. "Tomorrow we begin properly. There is much to prepare for." Lyria nodded, feeling the warmth of his touch linger longer than it should. As she returned to her chambers, her mind was alive with possibilities, fears, and questions. She was small in the eyes of the court, but she had caught the attention of the most powerful being in the kingdom. And she had felt, deep within her, that something was awakening, something that could change everything. That night, as she lay on her bed, she traced the crescent mark on her wrist once more. The warmth pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat of its own. And somewhere, far above the cliffs, Kaelin stood on the balcony of the palace, watching the moon rise over the ocean, thinking of her. He did not yet know the full extent of her power or the dangers that awaited them both. But he felt the bond, faint and fragile, yet undeniable. And he knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him, that Lyria's arrival into his world had begun something that neither of them could undo. The palace seemed smaller now, though its walls were taller than the tallest trees. The halls echoed with whispered rumors, secrets hidden behind silk curtains and carved doors. Lyria moved cautiously, each step measured, as if the polished marble could betray her fears. Even after weeks of training with Kaelin in the library, the court remained a place of danger. Eyes followed her, some curious, some suspicious, all judging. Her power, though still fledgling, had begun to awaken. At first it was subtle, a faint glow along the crescent mark on her wrist when she felt strong emotions, a flutter of warmth when she moved near the enchanted lanterns. Kaelin had warned her repeatedly. "Control is everything," he said. "Emotion feeds power, but power must serve the mind, not the heart." Lyria was learning slowly. Yet the line between fear and courage, desire and distraction, was thinner than she expected. Every time Kaelin's silver eyes met hers, a shiver ran down her spine. It was impossible to deny the pull, a magnetic force that seemed older than the palace, older than the kingdom. But she also knew she could not let it sway her judgment. The court was watching, and their disapproval could be as deadly as any enemy. One evening, under the glow of the full moon, Kaelin summoned her to the cliffside gardens. The night was quiet, the wind carrying the salt and mist of the sea below. The moonlight shimmered on the black leaves of the enchanted trees, casting silver shadows that danced like living spirits. "Tonight," Kaelin said, his voice low and commanding, "we test your control." He placed his hand over hers, guiding her to the center of a stone circle carved with ancient runes. Lyria felt the energy pulse beneath her fingers, responding to his presence. Her heartbeat quickened not from fear but from the intensity of being near him, of sharing something that no one else could understand. "Focus on your center," Kaelin instructed. "Let your power flow, but do not let it consume you. Feel it, do not fight it, and do not fear it." Lyria closed her eyes. She inhaled deeply, listening to the sound of the waves crashing below and the whispers of the wind through the trees. The energy within her swirled like water, warm and bright. She felt Kaelin's presence beside her, steady and unwavering, a beacon in the darkness. For a moment she faltered. Her power surged unpredictably, and sparks of light danced along the runes, threatening to leap into the air. Kaelin's hand tightened over hers, grounding her. "Breathe," he said softly, his voice a lifeline. With trembling focus, Lyria drew the energy back, shaping it with her mind, letting it spread through the circle without spilling into the night. The runes glowed steadily, a quiet pulse of magic in the moonlight. When she opened her eyes, Kaelin studied her with a mixture of pride and something else, something she could not name. "You are ready," he said. "But remember, readiness does not mean certainty. The world outside this garden is more dangerous than any lesson I can teach." Lyria nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She wanted to ask him what he meant, to demand more guidance, but the words stuck in her throat. She had learned to respect Kaelin's authority, yet a part of her longed to challenge him, to step beyond the boundaries he set, to explore the unknown connection that drew her to him. Days passed in a blur of study, practice, and cautious observation. Lyria's presence in the court had become unavoidable. Some nobles whispered admiration for her courage, but many more murmured suspicion. How could a human, untrained and untested, capture the attention of the Alpha King? How could she wield power that even seasoned Fae feared to touch? The tension in the court reached a breaking point one evening, during a feast held in honor of Kaelin's victory over a rebellious faction near the cliffs. The hall was filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of crystal glasses, Yet beneath the surface, danger stirred. Eyes followed Lyria wherever she moved, daggers hidden behind smiles and compliments. A young noble approached her, his silver hair shining under the candlelight. "It seems the king has taken a liking to you," he said, his tone light but with a sharp edge. "You must be careful. Not everyone sees it as a blessing." Lyria stiffened. She had known this, but hearing it aloud made the threat real. "I am careful," she replied evenly, refusing to let fear show. "Careful is not always enough," the noble said, bowing slightly. "Some of us do not forgive. Some of us do not forget." Before she could respond, Kalen appeared at her side, silent as a shadow. His presence alone commanded attention. The noble's smile faltered. "Leave," Kalen said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that silenced the hall. "Now." The noble's bow was stiff, and he retreated, muttering under his breath. Lyria exhaled, trembling slightly. Kalen's hand brushed hers briefly, a subtle reassurance, but enough to remind her of the bond that pulsed quietly between them. Later that night in the library, Lyria reflected on the day. The court's hostility was growing, and she realized that her power was no longer something private, something to be tested safely. It had drawn attention, and attention in this world often meant danger. Kalen appeared in the library without announcement, as he often did. "You have done well today," he said quietly, watching her study the glowing runes of an ancient tome. I fear," Lyria admitted, "that my power will bring more enemies than allies." Kalen's silver eyes softened. "Fear is natural," he said, "but so is courage. You have both, Lyria. That is why you are here and why you survive." Their eyes met, and for a moment the library seemed to fade away. The ancient books, the glowing runes, the polished marble, all disappeared, leaving only them, standing on the edge of something neither dared name aloud. "Kalen," Lyria whispered. She did not know what to say, only that her heart beat faster when he was near. "Lyria," he said, stepping closer, "the bond between us is growing. You cannot deny it, nor can I, but the court is not ready, and neither of us is free of duty." The weight of his words pressed down on her. She had known this was dangerous, had known the consequences, but hearing it confirmed left a hollow ache in her chest. Suddenly, a warning horn sounded in the distance, a signal that the palace gates were under threat. The library's enchanted lanterns flickered as the wind howled through the corridors. Lyria's pulse quickened, and Kalen's expression hardened. "Stay here," he commanded, drawing a blade that shimmered with silver light. "I will investigate." I will come with you," she said, her voice firm, despite the fear rising in her chest. "You are not ready for battle," Kalen said, his tone final. "Your power is not yet controlled. Stay here and guard the library. It will protect you if you do not leave its walls." Reluctantly, Lyria nodded, watching as Kalen disappeared into the shadows. Her heart ached to follow, but she obeyed. The runes on the library floor pulsed faintly in response to her worry, a reminder that her magic, though growing, was still tethered to her control. Hours passed. The wind howled and the palace shivered with the threat of the unknown. Lyria remained by the runes, practicing her control, testing the limits of her power. Sparks of light danced across the floor, responding to her emotions, but she forced herself to remain calm. And then she felt it, a surge of energy unlike anything she had ever felt before. The crescent mark on her wrist burned brightly, a signal that something, or someone, was approaching. Kalen returned, silent but commanding, his expression darkened by the struggle he had faced. He sheathed his blade and approached her slowly. "You felt that?" he asked, his silver eyes searching hers. Yes," Lyria said, trembling. "Something is coming." Kalen nodded. "Yes, and it is drawn to you, not me. Your mark, it calls to forces older than the palace, older than the mountains. You must be ready, Lyria, not just for me, but for what lies beyond." Her heart pounded. She had trained, learned, and grown, yet she understood now that her journey had only just begun. The bond between her and Kalen was real, undeniable, and yet dangerous. It was a connection that could save them or destroy them both. For the first time, Lyria realized the full weight of what it meant to be connected to Kaelin, not just as a pupil, not just as a human in a Fey world, but as someone whose very existence could change the course of the kingdom. The night stretched on, and the library seemed to hold its breath. Lyria and Kaelin stood together, separated by duty, yet united by something deeper. The moon rose high above the cliffs, casting silver light on the polished floors, and the shadows whispered promises of challenges yet to come. The palace was quiet before the storm. A heavy tension had settled over the cliffs, as if the walls themselves waited in anticipation. Lyria stood at the edge of the balcony, the crescent mark on her wrist pulsing faintly, responding to the distant rumble of thunder. She could feel it, the presence of forces moving beyond the gates, forces older than the mountains, older than the kingdom itself. And she knew that everything she had learned, every lesson Kaelin had taught her, would be tested tonight. Kaelin appeared silently beside her, his silver eyes reflecting the storm above. He did not speak at first. He simply watched the horizon, where dark clouds gathered over the cliffs, shadows of the unknown creeping closer. "They are coming," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "The court is restless, and those who envy your place will act tonight. We must be ready." Lyria nodded, gripping the railing, trying to steady her racing heart. She had grown stronger, more confident in her magic, but she also knew that the night ahead would demand more than strength. It would demand courage, sacrifice, and trust, not only in herself but in Kaelin and in the bond they shared. "The bond," she whispered. "Do you think it will be enough?" Kaelin turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "It must be, not for me, not for the kingdom, but for you. The choice is yours, Lyria, to step forward or step back, to embrace what you are or deny it. There is no middle ground tonight." The wind tugged at her sleeves as she nodded, feeling the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders. She was no longer the human who had stumbled at the mating ceremony. She was a force awakened, tied to the Alpha King, and bound to the fate of a kingdom teetering on the edge of chaos. Inside the palace, the halls were a hive of whispers and suspicion. Nobles paced in the candlelight, their voices low but urgent. Lyria felt the pulse of magic beneath the floors, sensing fear and ambition intertwining like a living thing. Some had already begun to conspire, believing her presence a threat to tradition, to the balance of power that had governed the Fae for centuries. "Stay close," Kaelin said, taking her hand in his. The warmth that passed between them was both comforting and fierce, a reminder of the bond that had grown silently over weeks of study, training, and shared moments in the moonlit gardens. They moved through the palace together, silent shadows, until they reached the central hall. There, a gathering had formed, a small rebellion of nobles who had grown bold in her absence, ready to challenge her in Kaelin's authority. "You dare bring a human into the throne room," one noble demanded, his voice trembling with both anger and fear. "Do you not see the dishonor it brings?" Kaelin's silver eyes glinted. "The human has proven herself," he said calmly, "more than any of you." Lyria felt a spark of courage ignite within her. She stepped forward, feeling the pulse of magic through her veins. The crescent mark glowed faintly, responding to her determination. "I am not here for your approval," she said, her voice steady. "I am here because this kingdom needs protection, and I will stand with Kaelin to do it." The nobles gasped, their confidence wavering in the face of her unwavering stance. Some murmured doubts, while others scowled, unwilling to accept the challenge of a human standing among them. Suddenly, a surge of energy struck the hall. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the walls, and a cold wind tore through the room. Lyria instinctively raised her hands, focusing her magic, feeling it respond to her fear, her courage, and her determination. The crescent mark blazed with light, casting silver patterns across the marble floor. Kaelin moved beside her, a sword of silver light in hand, his presence steadying her. Together they faced the darkness, the unknown force testing them, probing the limits of their bond. "You are stronger than I feared," a voice hissed, echoing through the hall. The figure that emerged was cloaked in shadow, its form shifting, impossible to define. Lyria felt her heart race, but she did not falter. She drew upon the lessons Kaelin had taught her, focusing on control, on channeling her energy without letting it overwhelm her. The shadow attacked, a whirlwind of darkness that sought to separate her from Kaelin, but she held fast, their bond anchoring her. Magic surged from her mark, striking the shadow with silver light. The force recoiled, hissing, and Kaelin stepped forward, striking with precision, cutting through the darkness with his blade. Time seemed to stretch. Lyria's power, once uncertain and flickering, now moved with clarity and intent. She realized that this bond, fragile yet unbreakable, was not just her strength. It was their strength, tied together by trust, respect, and the quiet longing that had grown between them. With a final surge of energy, Lyria channeled all her power into a single pulse, pushing the shadow back, forcing it to dissipate into nothingness. The hall fell silent. The glow from her mark dimmed, leaving faint silver patterns on the marble, a testament to the power she had controlled. Kaelin lowered his sword, his expression softening as he turned to her. "You did it," he said quietly, pride and relief mingling in his voice. I did it," Lyria whispered, disbelief and triumph in her tone. She felt exhausted, yet stronger than she had ever felt before. The court was silent, shocked by the display of power. Some nobles bowed their heads, acknowledging her bravery. Others, still wary, could not hide the grudging respect forming in their eyes. Kaelin stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "You have grown," he said, "not just in power but in courage. You are ready, Lyria. Ready to choose your place in this world, and ready to face the challenges that come with it." Her chest swelled with emotion. She realized now that her fear had been a teacher as much as her magic. She had stumbled, been laughed at, faced whispers and suspicion, and yet she had risen. And she had not done it alone. Kaelin's guidance, his quiet presence, and the bond they shared had carried her through every test. The storm outside began to break, rain pattering against the windows, washing the palace in silver light. Lyria looked out over the cliffs, the ocean churning below, and felt a sense of calm settle over her. She was no longer the human who had tripped at the mating ceremony. She was a force in her own right, a being tied to magic, destiny, and the Alpha King himself. Kaelin moved to stand beside her, their hands brushing once more. The connection between them was no longer uncertain or hesitant, it was solid, a bond forged through challenge, trust, and shared strength. "Lyria," Kaelin said softly, his silver eyes meeting hers, "the kingdom may still test us, the court may still resist. But whatever comes next, we face it together." She smiled, a mix of relief and determination shining in her expression. "Together," she repeated. For a long moment they simply stood there, the storm passing around them, the palace calm at last. And in that silence, there was an unspoken promise, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they had nurtured, one that would carry them through whatever trials remained. The palace doors opened softly behind them, and the remaining nobles entered, their expressions a mixture of awe and respect. Some bowed deeply, acknowledging the courage they had witnessed. Others remained silent, unable to hide their grudging admiration. And then, as the moon broke through the clouds, casting silver light over the cliffs, Lyria felt a presence, a faint pulse of energy, older and wiser than anything she had felt before. It was not threatening, not yet. But it reminded her that her journey was not over, that the world was vast and full of mysteries yet to be uncovered. Kaelin squeezed her hand gently, sensing her thoughts. "This is only the beginning," he said, "but you are no longer afraid. You are ready." Lyria looked up at him, her eyes shining with newfound confidence. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." And in that moment, under the silver light of the moon, with the storm finally breaking and the palace at peace, Lyria and Kaelin stood side by side, bound not only by destiny but by choice, courage, and the unspoken connection that had grown between them. The kingdom was not yet fully at peace, and challenges would come, but for the first time, Lyria knew she could face them. She had stumbled at the beginning, been laughed at and doubted, and yet she had risen. She had embraced her power, her courage, and her bond with the Alpha King, and that, she realized, was the truest kind of strength.